When my daughter-in-law told me to leave my own home, I smiled instead of crying. It wasn't because I was strong. It was because I had no tears left. That morning, the sun filtered through the kitchen curtains, painting gentle patterns on the tiled floor. I was making tea, 2 cups as I always did. One for myself and one for anyone who might wander in. These small acts had become my way of feeling useful, of belonging. I heard her footsteps before she spoke. They were light, quick, always a little impatient. She cleared her throat softly and said, "Mama, we need to talk." My heart tightened. Those words, "we need to talk," they never come with good news. I set down the spoon, wiped my hands on my apron, and turned toward her. She stood by the doorway, arms folded, trying to look calm, but her eyes couldn't hide it. Something had been decided long before this moment. She took a breath. "It's about the house," she began. "I think maybe it's time you stayed somewhere else for a while. You've done so much for us, but we just need some space now." For a moment, everything inside me went still. The kettle hissed behind me, a thin whistle of steam filling the silence. I thought of my son upstairs, still asleep, unaware of what was happening. I thought of my little grandson's laughter echoing through these same rooms. And suddenly, I felt like a guest in the house I had built brick by brick with my husband 40 years ago. But instead of arguing, I smiled. It was the only thing I could do that didn't make me crumble. I nodded and said softly, "If that's what you think is best, my dear." She seemed surprised, maybe even relieved. I could tell she had rehearsed this conversation in her head many times, expecting tears or anger. But there was none, only quiet acceptance. When she left the kitchen, I sat down at the table and looked around. Every surface, every photo, every crack on the wall carried a memory. My husband's chair was still there, worn out at the edges. I used to imagine him sitting there, smiling at me over his cup of tea. I whispered to that empty chair, "Looks like it's time for me to move again. Old man. You know, I never imagined my life would come to this. When you raise a child, you picture their laughter, their weddings, their happiness. You don't picture the moment when they quietly drift away and someone else becomes the center of their world. You tell yourself it's natural, it's what love is supposed to do. But your heart doesn't always agree. I was born in a small village, surrounded by mango trees and the sound of river water running past our backyard. My parents weren't rich, but we had enough, and plenty of love to fill the spaces money couldn't reach. I married young. My husband, Yusuf, was gentle and soft-spoken. He loved reading the newspaper at breakfast and talking about the world as if it were a classroom. We built our life slowly, one paycheck, one repair, one sacrifice at a time. When our son, Arif, was born, everything changed. He was my whole world. I remember his first steps, tiny, wobbly, as he tried to run toward his father's open arms. I remember the nights when he had a fever and I stayed awake holding his small hand, praying under my breath. Those moments make up a mother's lifetime. As he grew, Arif became everything we hoped for: kind, respectful, and smart. He studied hard, earned a scholarship, and left for the city. The day he left, I felt both pride and emptiness. Yusuf and I stood at the bus stop watching the vehicle disappear down the road, and I whispered, "Our little boy's gone to build his world." Years passed. The house got quieter. Then one day, Arif called and said he was bringing someone home. That was the first time I heard her name, Aisha. She sounded lovely on the phone, polite, gentle, full of laughter. I could hear in my son's voice how much he loved her. I told Yusuf, and we both smiled. "He's found his heart," I said. And my husband replied, "Then we must welcome her with open arms." I remember the day they arrived. Aisha stepped out of the car in a soft blue dress, her hair tied neatly and her smile bright enough to light up the driveway. She bent down to touch my feet, and I lifted her quickly, hugging her instead. She laughed shyly. From that moment, I thought she was like the daughter I never had. The first few months were beautiful. We cooked together, laughed over silly things, and spent long evenings in the garden sipping tea. I would tell her old stories, how Arif once broke a neighbor's window while playing cricket, how he used to hide his exam results under the bed. She would laugh and look at him teasingly. Sometimes, when she came home tired from work, I'd say, "Go rest. I'll handle dinner." And she'd protest, "No, Mama. I'll help you." That's how it felt, like we were building a new family rhythm. Then, when my grandson was born, I thought my world was complete again. Holding that little boy in my arms was like holding my son all over again. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and I felt purpose breathe back into me. Aisha was a devoted mother, and I admired her for that. But as months passed, I began to sense small changes, small distances. She'd say things like, "Mama, please don't give him sweets. The doctor said no sugar." Or, "He shouldn't nap in your room. He sleeps better in his crib." I understood. New mothers have their ways, and I didn't want to interfere. But each time, something inside me stepped back, one small step at a time. After my husband passed away, the house felt colder. Arif was busy with work, and Aisha was caring for the baby. I tried not to depend on them, but loneliness has a way of seeping through the cracks, even when you don't speak of it. I filled my days with chores, prayers, and long walks in the garden. Sometimes I'd hear laughter from the living room, the sound of my grandson's voice, and I'd peek in just to see his smile. But slowly, I noticed fewer conversations at the dinner table. Fewer invitations to join their outings. I told myself they were busy, young, building their life. I didn't want to be the mother-in-law who clings too tightly. One evening, I overheard something that stayed with me. Aisha was talking to her friend on the phone in the next room. She said softly, "It's hard living with someone always watching, you know. I need my own space." Her tone wasn't cruel, just tired. But those words sank deep. I remember standing in the hallway frozen. I never wanted to make anyone feel watched or uncomfortable. I only wanted to belong. That night, I lay awake and stared at the ceiling, thinking about how love changes. When your children are small, you are their whole world. But when they grow up, you become just a chapter, one they read less often. Music fades, rain begins softly in the background. The day she finally told me to leave, it didn't come as a shock. I had seen it coming like slow rain before a storm. But knowing doesn't make it hurt less. I packed my things quietly, a few clothes, my husband's photograph, my prayer mat, and the small box of letters he had written to me when we were young. When my grandson ran into my room asking, "Nani, where are you going?" I forced a smile and said, "Just a little trip, my love. I'll be back before you know it." He hugged me tightly. And for a moment, I almost changed my mind. But some goodbyes must happen quietly, before they turn into fights. That's how my journey began. Not away from a house, but away from everything familiar. I didn't know where I'd go or what waited for me. But deep inside, I believed one thing. Sometimes leaving is not losing. It's the first step toward peace. When I stepped outside that morning, suitcase in hand, the air felt heavier than usual. The same garden that once bloomed with laughter now stood quiet. The flowers I had planted years ago, marigolds and jasmine, swayed gently, unaware that I might never tend them again. I looked back at the house one last time. The windows were closed, curtains drawn. It didn't feel like mine anymore. My son came out just as I reached the gate. He looked tired, maybe from the late-night arguments he tried to balance between love and duty. He didn't say much. Just, "Ami, please call me when you reach." I nodded and smiled. Mothers are good at pretending they're fine. I could tell he didn't want to look me in the eyes. Sometimes, love makes people silent when they should speak. He hugged me briefly, and I felt the weight of his heart pressed against mine, full of guilt. Confusion and love all tangled together. Then he let go. I walked away slowly, my steps steady but my chest trembling inside. Every step felt like a goodbye to the years I had poured into that home. The meals cooked, the lullabies sung, the quiet prayers whispered in corners. I went to stay with my cousin, Safia, who lived about an hour away. She welcomed me with warmth and tears. "You're always welcome here, sister," she said, holding my hands. Her home was smaller but cozy, filled with laughter and the smell of cardamom tea. For the first few days, I busied myself helping her around the house. I cooked, cleaned, played with her grandchildren. It distracted me. But at night, when everyone slept, I'd sit by the window and stare into the dark. That's when memories crept in. The sound of my grandson calling Nani, or my husband's voice saying, "Home is wherever love lives." I wondered if I had done something wrong. Had I been too helpful? Too present? Did Aisha ever see how much I loved her? Truly loved her, like my own? Sometimes love gets misunderstood. What you mean as care can look like interference to someone else. A week later, I wrote a letter to Aisha. I didn't plan to send it. I just needed to put my heart somewhere safe. My dear Aisha, I'm sorry if my presence ever made you uncomfortable. I never wanted to stand in the way of your happiness or your home. I only wished to share it quietly, as a mother who once belonged there. You are a good woman. You love my son and care for our grandson with all your heart. I hope one day you'll see that my love was never a burden. It was just another form of home. Take care of each other. And remember me kindly. Mama, after finishing, I folded the paper neatly and placed it inside my husband's old wooden box. Some feelings are better kept in silence. Days turned into weeks. I found small joys again. Morning walks with Safia, feeding the stray cats outside, tending to her tiny garden. People in the neighborhood began to recognize me. They'd wave and I'd smile back. But sometimes when I passed by a toy shop, I'd stop and stare at the little cars and stuffed animals in the window. My grandson loved those. I wondered if he missed me, if he asked where I'd gone. One evening, my phone rang. It was Arif. "Ami, how are you?" he asked softly. "I'm fine, Beta. How's everyone at home?" "Everyone's okay," he replied, but his voice hesitated. I could hear the distance, not the physical kind, but the kind that builds in silence. "I miss you," he finally said. I swallowed hard. "I miss you too, my son. How's my little one?" "He's good. He asks about you sometimes," Arif said quietly. "Aisha told him you're visiting a friend." I smiled faintly. "That's a kind lie." He didn't respond. Then he said, "Ami, maybe after a few weeks you can come visit." "Let things cool down a little," I agreed, because sometimes waiting is the only thing you can do when love is caught between two hearts. Aisha didn't call. Not once, and though I told myself I understood, it still hurt. Silence can be louder than words sometimes. I replayed moments in my head. The times she smiled, the times she frowned, the small things I might have said wrong without realizing. Maybe I told too many stories. Maybe I folded laundry the wrong way. Maybe I loved too loudly. But motherhood doesn't come with an off switch. It just changes shape. One afternoon, Safia found me sitting quietly by the window. "You think too much," she said gently. "You gave your best, and that's enough. Some lessons in life come with pain, but they still make us grow." I nodded, though my heart still ached. "I just miss them," I whispered. She smiled kindly. "And they'll miss you too, when the noise fades and they realize what silence feels like." Her words stayed with me. About 2 months later, Arif called again. His voice was softer, slower. "Ami, it's the boy's birthday next week. He wants you there." "Aisha." She agreed. For a second, I couldn't breathe. "She agreed?" I repeated. "Yes," he said, almost embarrassed. "She said it would be nice for him to have his grandmother there." My heart fluttered. "Then I'll come," I said, trying to hide my trembling voice. The night before I went, I prayed long and hard. Not for forgiveness, but for peace. For all of us. When I reached the house, it looked the same. Neat garden, bright curtains, the smell of home floating through the air. But I felt like a visitor now. Aisha opened the door. For a moment, we just looked at each other. She smiled faintly. "Assalamu alaikum, Mama." "Wa alaikum salam," I whispered. "You look well, dear." She stepped aside to let me in. My grandson ran up and threw his arms around me. "Nani," he shouted, his face glowing. I held him tight, tears filling my eyes. For that moment, nothing else mattered. The birthday went smoothly. Laughter, cake, balloons, everything a child's day should have. But I could feel the tension beneath it, like a quiet hum you can't turn off. Aisha was polite, even kind. She made sure I had tea, asked if I was comfortable. But there was still that invisible wall between us. At one point, I saw her watching me play with my grandson, a distant look in her eyes. I wanted to ask her what she was thinking, but I didn't. Later that evening, when everyone was busy cleaning up, I found her in the kitchen stacking dishes. I walked in quietly and said, "Thank you for letting me come." She paused. "He really missed you," she said softly. "And you?" I asked gently. She hesitated, then sighed. "Mama, it's not easy for me either. I never wanted to hurt you. I just needed space. I felt like I was always being compared or watched. Maybe it wasn't your fault. Maybe it was just me," I nodded. "Maybe it was all of us, trying too hard to hold love the same way we used to." For the first time, she looked at me, really looked, and her eyes softened. "You remind me of my own mother," she said quietly. "She passed before I got married. Sometimes when you tried to help me, it brought back things I wasn't ready to feel." I reached out and placed my hand on hers. "Then I'll love you for her too," I whispered. She didn't say anything, but her eyes filled with tears. That night, when I left, she hugged me. It wasn't long or dramatic, just a simple, quiet embrace, but it felt like a beginning. After that visit, things didn't change overnight. But they began to heal in small, almost invisible ways. Aisha started calling me occasionally, sometimes to ask about a recipe, sometimes just to say hello. My son visited more often. My grandson sent me little voice messages saying, "I love you, Nani. It wasn't perfect." But love rarely is. It's made of small steps, forgiveness, patience, and the willingness to understand. I still lived with Sophia, but my heart felt lighter. I began to believe that maybe leaving wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was the space we all needed to learn love again, without pride or pain. That was the beginning of healing. Quiet, slow, almost fragile. But real, because sometimes the heart doesn't mend through grand gestures or big apologies. It heals through small, tender moments when someone finally says, "I understand you now," months passed after that visit. Life found its rhythm again. Aisha would call me every now and then, usually short conversations. "Assalamu alaikum, Mama. How are you feeling today?" I'd answer, "I'm fine, dear." "How's my little one?" She'd smile through her voice. "Growing too fast. He keeps asking when you'll come again." Those small calls meant more than she knew. Each word was like a thread, gently stitching our hearts back together. I didn't expect much. I only prayed that someday she'd truly see me again, not as someone who overstayed her welcome, but as a woman who had once carried her son, who loved them both more than words could hold. One rainy afternoon, the phone rang again. But this time it wasn't my son's number, it was hers. Her voice trembled. "Mama, can you come?" My heart raced. "Aisha, what happened?" "It's Arif," she said quickly, breath shaky. "He's in the hospital. There was an accident on his way home from work. He's stable, but they said we should come." I didn't even pack a bag. Within the hour, Safia drove me to the city hospital. The whole way there, my heart prayed in silence. When I reached, I saw her standing outside the emergency ward, pale and exhausted. The moment our eyes met, she broke down. She ran to me and held on tightly. The same woman who once asked me to leave now clinging to me as if I were her anchor. "Mama," she sobbed. "I don't know what to do." I wrapped my arms around her. "It's all right, my dear. I'm here now." That night, we sat side by side in the waiting room. I held her hand, and she didn't let go. The doctor came out later and said Arif would recover, minor fractures, nothing life-threatening. Relief washed through us like light breaking through clouds. Aisha sank back into the chair, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I'd lost him, Mama. I wiped her tears gently, the way I used to do for Arif when he was small. "God gives and protects, my dear. You've both been blessed," she nodded, trembling and whispered, "I was so afraid. I didn't even think to call anyone else. I just called you." Those words went straight to my heart. For the first time, I realized she didn't see me as a burden anymore. She saw me as home. I stayed at the hospital with her for 3 days while Arif recovered. We took turns sitting by his bed. I brought her tea, made her rest when she looked too tired, and whispered small prayers while she slept in the chair beside him. One morning, as I helped her comb her hair in the hospital washroom, she looked at me through the mirror and said softly, "You're always calm, Mama. Even when everything falls apart, you stay steady." I smiled faintly. "Life teaches you that." After losing your father-in-law, I thought I'd never smile again. But then Arif's laughter saved me. "Love has a way of doing that." She turned to face me. "You remind me of what I want to become one day." Her words warmed me more than the sun outside that hospital window. When Arif was discharged, Aisha insisted I come home with them. Not as a guest, not for a visit, but just to stay until he's better. I hesitated at first. The memories of leaving still stung. But when she looked at me with those tearful, pleading eyes, I knew this was different. So I went back. Walking through that gate again felt strange, like stepping into an old dream. The house smelled of home, of life. My grandson came running, shouting, "Nani's back!" I laughed and hugged him tight. It was the sound of forgiveness, pure and simple. Aisha welcomed me inside and said quietly, "Your room is ready." I washed the sheets myself. I smiled, touched beyond words. For days we moved like careful dancers, both aware of the past, but trying not to step on it. We spoke softly, helped each other in the kitchen, and shared quiet dinners. Sometimes I caught her watching me as I folded laundry or stirred the soup. But now her gaze was different, not guarded, but grateful. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Aisha knocked on my door. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Of course, dear," I said, setting aside my knitting. She sat at the edge of the bed, her eyes glistening. "Mama, I need to tell you something." I waited. "When I asked you to leave," she began, voice trembling, "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I needed to protect my space, my marriage. But I see now, I was protecting my pride." She looked down, ashamed. "I was wrong," she continued. "You never meant harm. You only loved us. And I made you feel unwanted in your own home. I don't know how to forgive myself for that." I reached out and took her hand. "My dear," I said softly, "forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you give. And I gave it long ago." Tears streamed down her face. She leaned forward and rested her head on my lap, like a child seeking comfort. I stroked her hair gently. "You've been through much," I whispered. "And I understand now. You never pushed me out of hate. You were just finding your way, like every young woman does." She sobbed quietly, and I let her. Sometimes tears are the only prayer we have left. That night, something between us changed forever. After that conversation, our days grew lighter. We began cooking together again. She'd chop the vegetables while I stirred the pot. We shared stories, laughter, and even small secrets. She told me about her struggles at work, her fears as a mother, her loneliness when Arif worked late. I listened, not as someone older or wiser, but as someone who had once stood where she was. One afternoon, while folding clothes, she said softly, "You know, Mama, I used to think love was about being perfect, but now I think it's about being patient." I smiled. "Patience and prayer, they fix more things than anger ever could." She nodded thoughtfully. "You were right to smile that day when I told you to leave." I looked at her, surprised. She continued, "I didn't understand it then, but now I do. You smiled because you loved us enough to let go." Her words brought tears to my eyes. "Yes," I said softly, "and I smiled because I knew love isn't about staying where you're wanted. It's about leaving before love turns bitter. She took my hand and squeezed it. I'll never forget that lesson. By the time Arif fully recovered, the house felt alive again. Laughter filled the rooms. Even the air seemed lighter. One Sunday morning, as we all sat around the breakfast table, Arif looked at both of us and said, "You two look like old friends now." Aisha smiled. "That's because we are," he chuckled. "I don't know what happened while I was asleep in the hospital, but I'm grateful for it." I laughed softly. "God works quietly, my son. Sometimes in pain, sometimes in patience." My grandson looked at me with curious eyes. "Nani, are you staying forever now?" I smiled and kissed his forehead. "Forever is a long time, my love. But for now, yes, I'm home." That night, as I sat by the window, the same view I had once watched through tears now glowed with peace. The lights flickered in the street, the air smelled of jasmine, and somewhere in the distance, laughter floated through the rooms. I realized then, love doesn't end when people fail us. It ends when we stop believing that hearts can change. And that day, mine had witnessed a miracle. This section focuses on peace returning, lessons unfolding gently, and love growing stronger in quiet ways. Tone: slow, reflective, warm, a soft emotional calm after the storm. Soft instrumental begins, piano and strings, peaceful morning atmosphere. It's strange how time changes a house, not just the furniture or the paint, but the air itself. How it begins to carry laughter again after months of silence. After the hospital days, our home felt different. The tension that once floated in every room had dissolved into something softer, gentler. There was no more pretending, no more careful steps. Aisha and I began to share everything openly. Recipes, worries, laughter, even the quiet moments between words. Sometimes she'd knock on my door late at night and say, "Mama, can I sit with you a while?" And I'd smile and say, "Always." We would sit by the window with 2 cups of tea and talk about everything. Her childhood, my memories of Yusuf, how motherhood never really ends, it just changes shape. She listened with curiosity, sometimes with tears. "I used to think you didn't understand me," she said once. "But you did. You just never said it." I chuckled softly. Mothers don't always speak. They just keep loving until someone finally sees it. Arif recovered well. He returned to work slowly, and his laughter returned with him. I could see how proud Aisha was of him, and how much she loved him, even after all the storms. One Sunday, I was in the kitchen frying parathas when Arif came in and hugged me from behind. "Smells like childhood," he said, grinning. I laughed. "Then you must have been a hungry child." Aisha peeked in from the doorway. "He still is." The 3 of us laughed together, and for a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. I didn't feel like an intruder anymore. I felt like a part of something whole again. In the weeks that followed, Aisha began to do small things that touched me deeply. She started leaving a cup of tea for me every morning before leaving for work, just the way I liked it, with cardamom and a little less sugar. Once she came home with a soft shawl and said, "Mama, I saw this and thought of you. It's the same color you used to wear in your wedding photo." I ran my hand over the fabric and smiled. "You have a good memory." She shrugged shyly. "I'm learning to see better." Her words warmed my heart. Because seeing, truly seeing, is what love is all about. One morning, I decided to tend to the garden again. The marigolds had withered, and the jasmine vines were overgrown. I took my old gloves and pruning shears and went out. Aisha joined me after a while, kneeling beside me as we pulled out the weeds. "Mama?" she said, brushing dirt from her hands. "You used to do this every morning, didn't you?" I nodded. "Yes, it kept me grounded. Plants are like people. They need care, but they also need space to grow." She smiled, understanding the deeper meaning. "I think I know what you mean. Together, we replanted the marigolds and watered the jasmine. When we stood back, our hands dirty and hearts light, I realized that what we were really tending wasn't just the garden. It was us. That evening, we sat outside, watching the sun sink behind the rooftops. Aisha turned to me and said, "Mama, I never told you this, but the day you left, I cried after you went. I didn't expect to, but I did. The house felt empty." I looked at her, surprised. "Then why didn't you call me?" She sighed. Pride. I told myself I was right, that I needed that space. But when I saw Arif so quiet, and the boy asking where you were every night, I realized I'd pushed love away. I placed my hand over hers. "It takes courage to admit that, my dear. We all learn through mistakes. What matters is that you came back to love." She smiled softly. "You're not just my mother-in-law anymore, Mama. You're my mother." My eyes filled with tears. "And you're my daughter, the one I was meant to find late in life." The sun dipped lower, bathing the sky in gold, and I thought, sometimes love finds its way back when we stop holding it too tightly. Weeks turned into months, and peace became our new normal. I started teaching my grandson little prayers and simple songs I used to sing to Arif. Aisha would watch us from the kitchen, smiling as she made dinner. Once, the boy asked me, "Nani, why do you always smile?" I laughed. "Because smiling keeps the heart young, my love." He nodded seriously, then said, "Mama smiles more now, too." I looked toward Aisha. She met my eyes and smiled, the kind that carried gratitude, not guilt. It's funny how children see what adults take years to understand. One afternoon, I went through my old wooden box, the one where I kept letters and photographs. Aisha came and sat beside me. "What's that?" she asked. "Memories," I said, handing her a letter. "Your father-in-law wrote this when Arif was born." She unfolded it carefully and read aloud. His handwriting was neat, his words simple. "One day, this house will be full of laughter again, even when we are gone. Because love never truly leaves a home." Aisha smiled through her tears. "He was a wise man." "Yes," I said softly. "And he was right. It took time, but the laughter came back." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I wish I could have met him." I patted her hand. "In a way, you have. You see him every day in Arif, and in how we've learned to forgive." It was around this time that Aisha surprised me. One morning, she brought me a small set of keys and placed them in my palm. "What's this?" I asked. She smiled shyly. "Your keys, Mama. You should never have to knock on your own door again." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My eyes blurred with tears. I held her face in my hands and whispered, "You've made your home my home again." She hugged me tightly. "It always was, Mama. I just couldn't see it before." That moment felt like a circle closing, the pain, the distance, the misunderstanding, all of it melting into peace. That night, as the house grew quiet, I stood at the window and prayed softly. Thank you, God, for bringing us back to each other, for teaching us patience, humility, and love, and for reminding me that even when we lose our place, we never lose our purpose. Outside, the jasmine flowers had bloomed again. The air smelled sweet, like forgiveness. I knew then that my journey, the one that began with heartbreak, had come home to grace. Sometimes when I sit alone, I think about how easily love can be misunderstood. We all want to be seen, to be valued, to be loved in our own way. But often, love gets lost between generations, between what we mean and what others hear. I've learned that being a mother never ends. Even when your children grow, even when they build their own homes, a part of your heart still beats quietly in theirs. And I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over pride. When Aisha told me to leave that day, I thought it was the end of everything. But it was really the beginning of seeing love more clearly, without ego or fear. Now, when she calls me Mama, it feels real. It feels whole. The home I once left in tears is now filled with laughter again. The same kitchen where I once stood alone is now where we cook together, side by side. And every morning when I see my grandson running toward me, shouting, "Nani!" I realize that love, when it's true, always finds its way back. Soft piano begins, slow and emotional, a tone of peace and closure. When I look back now, I sometimes wonder how such a small sentence changed my entire life. "Mama, I think it's time for you to leave." Those words once felt like the sound of a door closing forever. But today, when I remember them, I hear something else. A lesson, a quiet whisper from life itself. Because sometimes, being told to leave isn't about rejection. Sometimes it's life's way of making space for something deeper, understanding, growth, and love that finally learns to speak. It's been almost 2 years since that day. The wounds have healed, and what remains is gentleness. I still remember how cold that evening was, how the light from the hallway fell across my suitcase, how the sound of the door closing behind me felt heavier than anything I'd ever heard. But I also remember the next morning, when I woke up in that small guest house and realized that silence could also be kind. It gave me space to breathe. To remember who I was, not just a mother, not just a wife, but a woman who had lived, loved, and learned. Time, I've learned, doesn't erase pain. It only softens its edges until you can hold it without breaking. If I could speak to my younger self, the one who stood by that door, trying not to cry, I would tell her this: you will survive this. You will forgive her, and one day, she will call you Mama with love that's real. I would tell her not to let bitterness take root, because anger poisons the soil where love wants to grow. And I would remind her that kindness, even when it isn't returned, is never wasted. A kind word, a gentle silence, a patient prayer, they all bloom someday, even if it takes years. Now, most mornings, I wake before everyone else. I sit by the window with my tea and watch the sun rise over the same garden that once lay forgotten. The marigolds sway in the light breeze. The jasmine vines climb the old wall again. And every petal, every leaf, feels like a quiet promise that even after storms, beauty returns. Sometimes Aisha joins me. She brings her cup and sits beside me without saying a word. We don't need words anymore. The silence between us is peaceful now, like an old song we both know by heart. She'll smile at me and say, "Mama, you water these plants better than anyone." And I'll reply, "That's because I talk to them." They listen. We both laugh. And in that laughter, I feel how far we've come, from strangers in the same house to 2 women who finally understand each other. My grandson is growing fast. He runs through the garden, calling my name, his laughter echoing off the walls. "Mama says you make the best stories, Nani," he tells me proudly. I smile. Maybe because they all come from real life. He tilts his head. "Even the sad ones?" "Yes," I say softly. "Especially the sad ones. Because sadness teaches us to love better." He thinks for a moment, then hugs me tightly. And just like that, with small arms around my neck, everything feels whole again. There's a quiet joy in the ordinary things now. The smell of food cooking, the sound of Aisha's laughter from the kitchen, Arif's voice humming an old tune, my grandson's tiny footsteps running across the hall. These are the sounds of forgiveness, the music of home returning to itself. I no longer feel like a guest here. I belong, not because anyone told me I do, but because love found its way back into our hearts. Every night before I sleep, I whisper a small prayer. Thank you, God, for letting me stay long enough to see love come full circle. Because not everyone gets that chance. Many mothers leave this world carrying pain that never healed, words that were never said, love that was never returned. But I did. I lived long enough to see forgiveness take root, in me, in her, in all of us. And that is more than enough. Here's what life has taught me. Sometimes we lose our place not because we are forgotten, but because we are meant to find a deeper way to love. Sometimes, leaving makes room for others to learn what your presence truly meant. And sometimes the ones who hurt you the most end up loving you the deepest, once they learn what loss feels like. So if you ever find yourself standing by a door that's closing, don't lose heart. Maybe it's not the end. Maybe it's love taking the long way home. When my daughter-in-law told me to leave my own home, I thought it was the end of my story. But now I know. It was only the beginning of a new kind of love. A love that listens. A love that forgives. A love that waits quietly, patiently, until it is seen for what it truly is. So when I sit with her now, watching the sunset and hearing my grandson laugh, I whisper to myself, this is what healing looks like. Not loud, not perfect, just peaceful. And that, I think, is what home really means.